Hi everyone, my name is Chris Wright and I'm going to go through what I think are the 5 biggest takeaways from the UN climate talks in Glasgow for the MENA region. Number 1, methane. One of the key outcomes of COP26 was a pledge to reduce methane by 30% by 2030. Methane is a short-lived gas, so it doesn't have a big impact over 100 years, but over a 20-year period, it's about 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Signing up to this pledge included Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Libya, Mali, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, and the UAE. If all of the major emitters joined the pledge, it's estimated that the world could reduce global heating by about 0.2 degrees by 2050, and it could maybe prevent up to 200,000 premature deaths by 2030. Some notable exclusions from the region were Iran, Qatar, and next year's UN climate talks host, Egypt. However, point 2, Egypt did sign up to the Coal to Clean pledge. This was a pledge to phase out coal power in the next 2 decades. While coal isn't a big energy source across the MENA region, it is a big source of power for Morocco, who also signed the pledge with Egypt. And just to put this in context for Egypt, they don't have a lot of coal right now, but only last year they were still planning to build one of the world's biggest coal plants. So I think this is a clear sign of progress for the region. Another thing to take home is a first for the UN, and that was, for the first time in the UN climate talks history, we have an agreement that directly addresses the additional subsidies that are given to fossil fuels from governments like gas, oil, and coal. In what is now being called the Glasgow Climate Pact, all countries agreed to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Now, there isn't a clear date attached to that phase out, and there isn't any clarity on what an inefficient or an efficient subsidy is, but this is a really powerful message that MENA countries have agreed to. According to a 2015 study by the Overseas Development Institute in London, the G20 alone subsidized fossil fuels to the tune of about $444 billion a year. So it's a pretty big deal if we're going to phase those out. Another key element of the Glasgow Climate Pact is a request. So request is a pretty strong word, but it is only a request for all countries to revise and resubmit their climate action plans in the next 12 months, specifically to focus on their action this decade. Leading into COP26, we obviously saw Saudi Arabia and many other MENA countries pledge to go net zero by between 2050 and 2060. In Glasgow, countries agreed to have another look at their climate action plans and clarify what they plan to do in the next 8 years. So look out for that space in your country. And finally, number 5, on finance, the developed world was a little embarrassed at the beginning of the conference, having to admit that they haven't met their finance targets. They were hoping to get to 100 billion by this stage, and they're only at 80, so we're pretty far short. However, by the end of the 2 weeks, we can see a clear commitment to meet the $500 billion climate finance bill promised by 2025, and they pledged at the same time to double their adaptation finance, which was a big deal for many MENA countries going into the talks. Now, is this enough? Well, UNEP estimates that the cost of adaptation alone could reach $300 billion a year by 2030 and $500 billion a year by 2050. So the answer to that is no. As Climate Action Network's Harjeet Singh mentioned on funding for adaptation and loss and damage, in Glasgow, we are walking inches when we must move in miles. Saying that though, I think that these are 5 important takeaways for the MENA region after COP26. And while you might agree that this is not enough to prevent the world from pretty unstable global heating going forward, it is a step forward, and it is an opportunity for countries in the MENA region to revise their climate action plans in the next year and see what we can come up with next year in Egypt. So it's going to be a big couple of years for the MENA region, and I hope you'll stick around. See you later.
I hope COP27 in Egypt brings an opportunity for all Arab youth to be presented and to be part of the solution for the climate crisis.
My wish for the next COP is to have in every delegation some young negotiator. So each party should train a group of young people who have interest in the climate emergency, to engage them effectively in the negotiation side during the next COP.
What I want for COP27 is that the UNFCCC stops working in silos, that they learn that the approach to food, nature, climate, and biodiversity should be integrated all together, and that youth and indigenous communities should be at the center of climate justice.
My wish for COP27 is to have an inclusive COP that hears everyone, that gives everyone a chance to speak, and more importantly, a COP where climate journalism, our vision, actually flourishes and writes about climate change and why it matters to us.
Now that COP27 and COP28 are moving to the Middle East, my wish for the next two COPs would be for an increased climate action, not just on adaptation, but also on mitigation. We hope that the civil society becomes more engaged and that the COP becomes a more inclusive event.
See you next year in Egypt.